This is a map of Europe's urban street networks across dozens of cities on the continent. Notice how dense and compact these layouts are. Narrow corridors, tight blocks, streets that twist and curve in ways that make driving through them genuinely inconvenient. Now compare that to a map of American cities like Phoenix, Houston, or Los Angeles. The grids are enormous, the blocks are massive, and everything about the layout screams that it was designed around a car moving at speed. That contrast alone tells you almost everything you need to know about why these two places feel so radically different to live in. Let me show you another way to think about this. Most European cities predate the automobile by several centuries. Paris, Amsterdam, Vienna, these places were built when the only way to get somewhere was on foot or on horseback. Streets had to be narrow because space was scarce inside city walls. Markets had to be close together because people couldn't travel far. That physical structure never went away, and it turns out it was accidentally perfect for making cars inconvenient and walking extremely practical. American cities, by contrast, were largely built or massively expanded after World War II, right at the exact moment when cars became cheap and highways became a national obsession. The design priorities were completely different from the start. Now, if we compare zoning laws between the two, the gap becomes even more striking. In the United States, more than 70% of most cities is zoned exclusively for a single use, meaning it's actually illegal in many neighborhoods to have a corner grocery store, a cafe, or a pharmacy within walking distance of where people live. You have to get in a car just to buy milk. That's not an accident. That's a policy choice baked into the legal structure of American cities. Europe took a fundamentally different approach, allowing and even encouraging mixed-use development, where apartments sit above shops, offices are integrated with housing, and daily necessities are reachable on foot. The result is that European neighborhoods feel alive in a way that most American suburbs simply don't. I know what you're probably thinking, that Europe just got lucky because its cities are old. But that argument doesn't hold up. Amsterdam is one of the best examples here because Amsterdam used to be just as car congested as Dallas. Seriously. In the post-war decades, the Dutch embraced the car enthusiastically, and the city's streets filled up with traffic in exactly the way American cities did. The difference is that Dutch planners in the 1970s made a deliberate decision to reverse course, building physically separated bike lanes, investing heavily in trams and buses, and making it genuinely inconvenient to drive through the city center. Today, bicycles outnumber cars in Amsterdam. That transformation wasn't inevitable, it was chosen. Let me show you another map, this one of bike infrastructure density across Europe. The purple lines represent dedicated cycling paths, and the concentration of them, particularly in the Netherlands and Germany, is remarkable. Cycling makes up 14% of all transportation in cities like Amsterdam, and that number keeps climbing. Compare that to the United States, where a comprehensive national map of bike lanes doesn't even exist. At least not one that's been publicly compiled in any meaningful way. I can only wonder why. On top of that, the walkability gap between European and American cities is enormous. In major European cities like Paris, Vienna, and Barcelona, metro and tram stops are placed within a few blocks of nearly every residence and business. You don't wait an hour for a bus the way you might in an American city. Even small European towns have regular, reliable service running on strict schedules. American public transit, where it exists at all, often suffers from infrequent routes, long waits, and coverage gaps that make it genuinely impractical for most people's daily lives. Here's where things get particularly interesting. Europe disincentivizes car ownership through high vehicle taxes and expensive fuel, And that policy only works because the alternative is so attractive. If you look at a global map of gasoline prices, European nations consistently sit at the very top, while the United States sits near the bottom. Fuel in Germany or France can cost 2 to 3 times what Americans pay at the pump. Absolutely insane, right? Except it's entirely intentional. Making driving expensive pushes people toward trains, trams, and bikes, and since those options are genuinely fast and reliable, people make that switch willingly. But it's only fair to point out what happens when you try to apply expensive fuel without building the alternative first. In America, that would be a disaster. You'd just be punishing the 9% of Americans who already can't afford a car, and the many more who have no viable public option anywhere near them. Europe solved the sequencing problem. Build the infrastructure first, then make driving less attractive. America, for the most part, never completed step 1. The zoning situation in the United States also creates a problem that compounds everything else. When residential areas are legally separated from commercial ones, people are forced to commute long distances for basic errands. That increases car dependency, which increases traffic, which increases the pressure to build more roads and more parking. It becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. And speaking of parking, the numbers here are genuinely hard to process. The US has approximately 2 billion parking spaces for around 250 million registered vehicles. That works out to roughly 8 parking spaces per car. In Europe, the ratio is closer to 1 to 1. The total land area devoted to car parking in the United States is actually larger than the total land area devoted to housing people. That's not a design choice. That's a design failure on a civilizational scale. Now, if we compare the environmental consequences of these two approaches, the data is pretty striking. An average resident of a Western US city like Los Angeles or Phoenix contributes about 6 times more carbon to the atmosphere per capita than an average European city resident. 6 times. And the primary driver of that gap isn't industrial output or energy generation, it's transportation. A population that walks, bikes, and takes trains produces a fraction of the emissions of one that drives everywhere for everything. Europe has also been investing aggressively in green building standards in a way that has no real American equivalent at scale. The Passive House standard, which originated in Germany, produces buildings that use up to 90% less energy for heating and cooling than conventional construction. Germany mandates green roofs on new buildings above a certain size. Paris and Milan are integrating vertical gardens and green facades into their urban cores. The EU has committed to carbon neutrality by 2050 and set a binding target of 55% emissions reduction by 2030. These aren't just aspirational goals, they're backed by building codes, construction standards, and funding mechanisms. Between 2014 and 2020, the European Union directed 115 billion euros specifically toward making cities smarter, more connected, and more environmentally efficient. That kind of sustained, coordinated investment in urban infrastructure is extraordinarily difficult to replicate in a country where federal, state, and local governments frequently work at cross purposes, and where infrastructure projects routinely cost 10 times more than comparable builds in Europe. American construction costs are, by almost any measure, wildly out of step with the rest of the developed world. And the free movement dimension matters too, because most European nations are EU members. A person can cross from France into Germany or Belgium into the Netherlands without stopping, without showing a visa, sometimes without even a passport. That freedom of movement lets talent flow to where it's most useful and makes cross-border commuting and travel genuinely practical. It's one more structural advantage that reinforces the idea of cities and countries as connected systems, rather than isolated units competing with each other. Europe and the EU aren't perfect, far from it. There are cities with crumbling transit systems, countries that still heavily subsidize car infrastructure, and plenty of planning failures worth criticizing. I'd love to hear what you think Europe gets wrong. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on that. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.